محمد وعلى محمد بلند صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء. ما خاب من تمسك بكم والعمنا من لجأ إليكم سادتي. يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: والقول كالحق والأصدق القائلين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنحون عن المنكر. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
After they severed his body from his head and raised that head on a lance on the plains of Karbala, there was a feeling, there was an atmosphere amongst those 33,000 savages that within their camp they had defeated humanity. That within their camp they had defeated all justice and all virtue and all equity and all goodness. They felt as though the revolution had no longer had any value. But rather, when we take a look at the events following the day of Ashura and the martyrdom of our master Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, we see that the revolution did not end, but rather the revolution only began. For when we go ahead and try to understand the meaning and the essence behind the movement of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, we often take a look at it from several different phases. Firstly, we take a look at the revolution of Imam al-Hussein strictly from a theological perspective. He is the Imam of the Ahl al-Bayt. This was his right and his responsibility because he is ma'soom and he has isma, and this was his job by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Other people, when they take a look at the events of the day of Ashura, they see the revolution of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam from a historical perspective. They see that Hussein had been defeated on the plains of Karbala, but through his movement he exposed the ideology of Banu Umayyah, lighting a fire in the community of the Muslims. But when we want to try to internalize the actions and that which happened on the day of Ashura, in the idea that we can receive some sort of enlightenment, in the idea that we can receive some sort of lesson that we can apply in our daily lives from the day of Ashura, we do not take a look at it solely from a theological perspective or solely from a historical perspective. Rather, we take the day of Ashura, the events surrounding Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, and live by it. How do we do that? Whenever we take any of the words of the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, from Rasulullah to Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mahdi, we must recognize that the words of the Imams are what are known as real-time knowledge. that when the Imam comes forth and tells us something in the books of Hadith, we don't just take the Hadith, we read the Hadith and we say that this was for a specific time, for a specific people, and for a specific context. No. Rather, that the Ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, the words of the Imams, the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they are words that need to be lived by, words that need to be applied each and every one of our lives. That if you want real-time knowledge, faster than the knowledge on your iPhones, then go and open up the books of riwayat of Ahlul Bayt. Because they offer a knowledge that keeps on giving, for all times, for all places, for all people. Which is why when we want to go ahead and try to understand the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, we go straight to the words of Aba Abdullah. What does he say? That when any person, they wish to understand the true meaning and the true understanding behind the movement of Aba Abdullah, then the only thing that we need to go to is ask Imam al-Hussein, why did you make this movement? Why did you leave Medina? Why did you leave the city of your grandfather? Why did Imam al-Hussein leave the land where he was content? He offers the answer. He says in his famous will narrated to his brother Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, he says, Inni lam akhruj. Please understand the words from this tradition. He says, I do not leave I do not leave for the sake of causing corruption. I do not leave for exuberance. I do not leave to take any power. I do not leave for corruption. I do not leave to become an oppressor. I do not leave for anything. And then he says, إنما خرجت للطلب الإصلاح أمتي جدي. He says, I've only left for one purpose, and that is to reform the community of my grandfather. Oh, Abu Abdullah, how are you going to do that? He says, أريد أن أأمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر. If anyone wishes to give a response to those individuals who say that Hussein left for power, or Hussein did this, or Hussein did that, we go to the words of Imam al-Hussein. And if anyone tries to take a look at the different riwayat or different historical circumstances, we only find one reason why Abu Abdullah left. He says, أريد أن أأمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر. I want to do one thing. I want to proclaim Amr bil Ma'ruf and do Nahy anil Munkar. I want to enjoin others to good and forbid evil. That's it. That's it. Which is why we go and we take a look at the story of Bahlul. Bahlul, we all know, during the time of the Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, or Imam As-Sadiq, or Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida, alayhi salatu wasalam, the 6th, 7th, and the 8th Imams. He would often do silly things in order to get attention from the people. It said one day Bahlul, he went for Hajj. He went for Hajj and he was standing in front of the Kaaba. And anyone who goes to the Kaaba, they know when they first enter into Masjid al-Haram, the first time they see the Kaaba, it's a very emotional situation, no? When Bahlul enters, most people when they see the Kaaba the first time, they begin to weep, they begin to cry, they look down, they make their hajjah, right? Bahlul tried to make a point. As the group in the caravan was entering into Masjid al-Haram, as everyone raises their hands and they begin to whisper their dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Bahlul comes and he says, Ya Allah! He screams out. And everyone looks at him, what's wrong with this guy? And he says, Oh Allah! He says that if it weren't for Muhammad, no one would ever come to the Kaaba. And then he left and he went to Medina. It is said that when he entered into Medina, he entered into the grave of Rasulullah, the place surrounding the grave of Rasulullah. And as everyone is reciting their ziyarat, praying, reciting Quran, he calls out, Ya Muhammad! Everyone looks and they see him. He says, Oh Muhammad, if it weren't for Ali, no one would know you. He left Masjid al-Nabawi and he went toward Najaf. He entered into the shrine of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, and he looked at it. And as everyone was recitation, everyone was doing tasbihat, Bahlul comes and he says, Oh Ali, if it weren't for Hussein doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, no one would know you either. The message is what? That the reality of the revolution of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam comes down to this one point. And if it were not for him performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, then there is no practicality, there is no evidence to suggest that the school of Ahlul Bayt would continue, that the religion of Islam would continue to live on. Because after he says that my only goal is to establish, or my only goal is to enjoin others to do good and bring away people from evil, he begins and he says that mithli la yubayu mithlah, that a man like me can never give allegiance to a man like Yazid. Why? Yazid rakibul fujur, sharib al-khumur. He is an adulterer, he is an alcoholic, he is this, that, he is things that we cannot say from the minbar. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam says that I stand for all justice and I stand for all beauty, and on the complete opposite side is the man who represents all vice and represents all evil. A man who Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam had to stand up and repel people from his teachings. For this man Yazid ibn Muawiyah, if we come and inshallah we'll talk briefly about him tomorrow, but when we go ahead and we see Yazid ibn Muawiyah, we see that this man had more appreciation or more love for his pet monkey than human beings. So we hear the story that one day Yazid has a pet monkey called Abul Qais. They said that one day, some historians they write, that he used to take horses and he used to race them, gambling. One day he put his pet monkey Abul Qais on top of the horse as the jockey of the horse, and eventually the horse went out, the monkey fell off the horse and he died. Yazid ibn Muawiyah is the governor or is the caliph politically of about 50 contemporary countries. He owns 1/3 of the world's population under his hand, under his governance. He calls a Fatiha Majlis and orders that the dignitaries and the ministers of each and every one of these countries come to the Majlis for the passing away of his pet monkey Abul Qais. Who is Yazid ibn Muawiyah? Except the man that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam has to stand up against. But today we wish to come forth and try to understand the meaning of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. Because if we wish to derive enlightenment, teachings, applications from the day of Ashura and the teachings of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, then we must be of those people who take what happened on the day of Ashura, take what happened before the day of Ashura, take what happened after the day of Ashura, and be of those people to apply those teachings in each and every one of our daily lives. For if we take the story of Aba Abdullah, the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, as something only historical or as something only theological so we can get along in polemical debates with people of other schools, then we have failed. The idea is that we come forth and we take the school of Ahlul Bayt, we take the teachings of Imam al-Hussein and of all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, and we begin to apply those different things. Which is why when we come forth to seeing these words of Imam al-Hussein, أُرِيدُ أَنْ أَأْمُرَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, that my responsibility and my job and my goal is to only do two things, and that is to bring people toward good and repel people away from evil. We ask the question, how can we do that? First of all, we go ahead and we take a look at the Holy Quran in the verse that I began with. For if we are of those individuals, by the way, just to open up a side note, who come to the majalis of Imam al-Hussein every Friday, every Saturday, in the first 10 days of Ashura, in the Arba'een, but we are not of those individuals who open up this book, the Holy Quran, in these months, then truly we have failed to understand the mission of Abu Abdullah. Let us always go back to the Holy Quran. For this is the Quran that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam stood up for. Anyhow, so we go and we see that in chapter 3, verse 110, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states a very important verse that we need to take to memory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrajat linnas, that you, the Muslim community, is the best community. Why? Because they are of those individuals who perform Amr bil Ma'ruf and do Nahi anil Munkar. But this begs the question that if we are coined the best community by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran because of the reason that we do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, can we truly claim to be of those individuals? That today we go ahead and we see so many of the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt, that says that when a community stops performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, the entire fabric of the society has declined. For we know that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar are part of the Furu' ad-Din. That each and every one of our kids, when they come to the Sunday school, they memorize all of the 5 Usul ad-Din and all of the 10 Furu' ad-Din. Salat and Sawm and Hajj and Zakat and Khums and so on. But how many of us understand the jurisprudential backings of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar? Everyone prays, mashallah. Everyone fasts. We go for Hajj, we pay Zakat, and we pay Khums and all of this. But when it comes to Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, we treat it as not one of the wajibat. Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar are just as wajib as Salat, are just as wajib as the performing of Al-Hajj. So why is it that we have marginalized these two applications in our lives? We go ahead and we see that the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, they speak and they state that the most important of the wajibat in the community is performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, by bringing people toward doing good deeds and stopping them from doing bad deeds. Why? Because if this particular aspect, this particular practice stops in the community can no longer progress. For example, we go ahead and we take a family, that if the father, if the mother in the family, they stop telling the children that you no longer have to pray, what is going to happen to those children? They're going to grow up and what are they going to become? They're going to become prayers? No, absolutely not. If you go ahead and you don't tell your children, don't lie, when they grow up, what are they going to do? They're going to be the ones to lie to you all the time. The idea is that if Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar in a family, in a household, in an individual, you don't even remind yourself of these two particular wajibat, the entire community, the fabric of the society, the fabric of the human heart, if you are not one of those who remind yourself, will completely fall. And spiritual diseases will encounter and inflict the people, and inflict families, and inflict communities, and so on and so forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in this holy verse, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, that you were of the greatest community who have come out toward the people. The Muslims are the greatest people. Those Muslims who are practicing Muslims, those Muslims who are mu'mineen, because they are those individuals who perform Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. The question that we have to come and understand is that why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use the word in this verse, the word ummah? Ummah in the Arabic language means the community. We go ahead and we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, they always stress the importance of community. They stress the importance of brotherhood, of being one side by side. We go ahead and we see all of the ahadith stressing, for example, Salatul Jama'ah. Praying in congregational prayers is one of the greatest deeds that one can come forth. We see, for example, a tradition in which a man, he comes toward Rasulullah. Rasulullah was giving a khutbah, a sermon that day, and he was inviting people to perform congregational prayers. He says that no one should ever miss congregational prayers. It is said that immediately after that, after everyone was departing from the sermon, one old blind man, he came toward Rasulullah. And he said, "Oh Rasulullah," he said, "I am blind." He said, I cannot make my way to the mosque every single day. Can't happen, I can't do it. He says, why? The man says, because I have someone who can bring me for Salatul Dhahr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha, but Salatul Fajr he cannot bring me, he cannot hold my hand, and he cannot bring me. Rasulullah says, even if you have to go and tie a string from your mosque, from this mosque to your house, and use that string to guide yourself to get to congregational prayers, then do that. Why? Because when someone comes forth to praying together with their brothers and with their sisters, in a community, in brotherhood, in unison, it builds love, it builds understanding, it builds unity within a community. Furthermore, we see that when we come forth to Hajj, what do? We all dress in the same piece of cloth. We come forth and we perform the tawaf around the Kaaba. We call out those supplications all together one by one. Why? In order to create this brotherhood, in order to create this unity between a community. Furthermore, we go ahead and we see that we are advised many times to recite dua together. We come forth and we recite, for example, Dua Kumail. We come on Thursday nights, we raise our hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying, oh Allah, be of those who forgive us, because we are asking you all in unison, we are asking you togetherness. We have a dua called Dua al-Wahda, which we all hold our hands and raise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so on and so forth. We go ahead and we see the encouragement by the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt to sit in the majalis gatherings of Imam al-Hussein and weep together and cry together and recite poetry together and beat your chest together. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that make sure that you always remain an ummah. Make sure that you always remain a community. And the moment that the community begins to stop performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, know that they are no longer a community anymore. We go ahead and we see this example. We see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one day, during the time of one of the prophets of Bani Israel, I believe, it is stated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sends down two angels. And He said, you two angels go to this particular region, this community, and bring down the punishment on them, remove this entire community. It is said that these two angels, they came down, and they saw that there was a group of people in the masjid, in the place of worship, and they were performing ibadat. They were worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The angels went back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they said, oh Allah, they said, are you sure you got the right community? You know, Allah's going to get it wrong, right? So they said, you know, we went to the mosque and we saw that these people are praying. Are you sure you want to bring down the punishment on these people? They're prayers, they're worshippers. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told these two angels, He said, do as I instructed. He said, because that though there are a group of individuals in that community who pray and they fast and they do their wajibat, they also have an unjust tyrant living in that city. And they have refused to be of those individuals who came forth and stood against that tyrant and even spoke out against him or even hated him in their hearts. They didn't care. They were too individualistic. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, because they refuse to perform Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, they're no longer worth being people, for they have removed themselves of the humanity of the heart. That today we go ahead and we see in our communities how individualistic we've become. That sometimes we do not want to go and we do not want to speak out against problems in the community, against diseases in the community. We do not want to advise others. We do not want to be of those people who tell people to do good or tell people to stay away from evil. Why? Many of us, we do not care. We say, look, I am in my own worship and let that person be in their worship. That is one side of the story. The other side of the story, which is even more dangerous, is this idea that what? This idea that sometimes when we go and we try to advise people, the one receiving the advice takes it offensively. You go to your friend, you go to your cousin, you go to your brother and say, hey, you know you're not praying salat properly. When you do ruku, you're supposed to go ruku all the way down, your back's supposed to be flat. He gets up and says, what? Mind your own business. Right? No. That this in itself is a flaw of a community, a flaw of a human being. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kuntu khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, you are the best community. Why? Because you accept your faults and you begin to reform those faults. How many times in our communities, for example, you go and you see another child who is misbehaving in the mosque. You go and you say, hey, I think you should sit down and listen to the majlis. And what happens? The father will come and say, what do you do to my son? You don't go and tell my son. You don't tell my son anything. What is this? Where do we get this thinking from? That if we are a community, lovers of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam, then let us not be so, take everything to offense. Let us be of those individuals who take the advice, apply the advice as a community. And this will be of those, and if we perform these actions, we will be of that community which progresses forward, bringing us closer to manifesting the teachings of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. Which is why when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar from a jurisprudential perspective, we see that, as we mentioned before, Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar are amongst the wajibat. And amongst the wajibat, we have different types of wujub. We know in fiqh. We have one type of wajibat that is known as wajib al-kifai. and another wajibat which is known as wajibul aini. For example, when someone says assalamu alaikum, we know that it is that one person everyone is responsible for saying alaikum assalam. But if one person in that congregation responds alaikum assalam, that is not wajib upon the other people. Similarly, when we have, for example, a janazah, a mayyit in our community, a death, that is wajib upon the community to bring forth and perform the rituals of that mayyit, of that dead person. But if one person performs it, the burden is relieved from everyone else. When we come to Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, the question begs that if one person is performing an action wrong, and I go to that person and say, hey, you're performing that action wrong, and they continue, and everyone else is watching, are you also responsible to tell that person that you're performing the action wrong? Or does the burden get removed from the entire community? According to the fuqaha and the jurists, they state that no. Rather, that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar is wajib aini. That every single person within a community is responsible. They are wajib, the same wujub that is applied to salat and to fasting and to hajj and to zakat and to khums, to go toward that person or go toward that people or go toward that group or go toward that community and tell them, hey, don't do this, it's supposed to be done this way. That we have to be extremely careful. And we go ahead and we take a look from a hadith of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, in which he states that the one doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, he must have three qualities. The first quality is that he must be knowing the laws of the religion of Islam, and he must be knowing the akhlaq of the religion of Islam. We go ahead and we see that sometimes when we go and we give a ruling to someone else, if it happens to be a ruling of jurisprudence, we may not have knowledge, but we think that this is the way it should be done. No. Be certain. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the tradition of Ahlul Bayt, they say that this is evidence that you must know the rulings of the religion of Islam so that you can also go and teach others. You go ahead and you see number two, that Imam as-Sadiq, he states that when you are doing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, be just. That if you go ahead and you see that there is one rich guy in the community, that guy who might be giving you a job next week, next month, and he's doing something wrong, you say, nah, I'm not going to go and tell him. But this guy, I don't really like him that much, just to go and bother him, let me go and tell him that his salat is wrong. No. Be just to that guy and to this guy, to the tyrant and to the poor man. It doesn't make a difference. To the adult, to the child. It doesn't make a difference. That be just when performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. And thirdly, Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam says in this particular tradition, and which is the most important, that when you are telling other people to do good or telling them what they are doing is wrong and bringing them away from that, then be of those people who use good language. Sometimes we go and when we want to correct somebody or we want to advise somebody, what do? We use bad language. We scold them. No. Bring them with words that are known as beautiful words. Tell them with advice. Give them a hadith of the Ahlul Bayt. Nothing to be shy about. You go and you tell them that, look, I think that this is the way we're supposed to do it. And everyone knows we don't want to narrate that story of Imam Hassan and Imam al-Hussein when they're telling that old man how to perform wudu. We go ahead and we see the examples of Ahlul Bayt and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt that bringing people toward goodness and repelling them away from evil should be something that is beautiful. Should be something that is nice, should be something that brings forth and progresses the community. Which is why when we want to go ahead and talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, we go and we'll conclude with these last couple of points, and that is that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar are performed in three different phases. According to Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Holy Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar are on three phases. The first and the most extreme one is performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar with your hand. Meaning that performing something physically. That if someone has a bottle of alcohol and is about to drink that alcohol, what do? You go and you grab it and you push it down from him. This is if you can do that, and if you have the capabilities to do that. If you are in the region, if you are in the area, you go and you stop. Physically, you stand in front of someone, for example, who is going to get beat, who is going to be in danger, who is going to get hurt. Then we go ahead and we see that the second phase is what is known as Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar of the tongue. Meaning that we must go, it is wajib for us to go and speak out whenever we can. Using our tongue to advise people, speaking out against an oppressor, against an unjust person, and so on and so forth. Which is why we go ahead and we see the example of Zayd bin Ali. Zayd bin Ali is the son of Imam Zainul Abidin, alayhi salatu wasalam, the grandson of Aba Abdullah. Zayd bin Ali, after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, alayhi salatu wasalam, we know that there are several different revolutions that took place to try to go ahead and overthrow Banu Umayyah. One of these revolutions, the revolution of Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. Everyone knows the story of Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. We go ahead and we see another revolution is the revolution of a group called the Tawabin, the repenters, led by a man by the name of Sulaiman bin Sard al-Khuzai. We go ahead and we see that a third revolution is the revolution of Zayd ibn Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. Then we go ahead and we see that another revolution was the son of Zayd ibn Ali by a man by the name of Yahya ibn Zayd. Anyhow, this Zayd ibn Ali, Zayd al-Shaheed, and for those of you who will be going for ziyarah, for example, the ziyarah of the Arba'in, you may go and you might visit the shrine of Zayd ibn Ali. We go ahead and we see that Zayd, he comes forth, and when he comes in front of Banu Umayyah, these oppressors who killed Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he goes and he begins to speak out against them, saying that he is about to wage a war to try to overthrow Banu Umayyah. When they came to Zayd ibn Ali, a group of people, and they say, "Oh Zayd," he said, "why are you going and why are you performing this? You don't need to do this. You're not going to be victorious. You're going to get killed." He says, "What is the difference between me and you if you keep quiet and I am one of those who stand?" Which is why again we go to the day of Ashura. And we see that on the day of Ashura, there are several groups of individuals. There are the group of individuals with Imam al-Hussein. On the flip side, there are a group of individuals with Umar bin Sa'd. A third group of individuals were those people who were sitting on the sidelines, watching what was happening like they were watching a football match, seeing what was going on the day of Ashura. When they were approached and said, "Oh brothers, do you know who was Hussein?" They said, "Yes." "Do you know who was Umar bin Sa'd?" "Yes." "Then how come you don't go and support Hussein?" They said, "We don't want to get involved." Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, at the very least, the second level, according to the hadith of the Prophet, is to speak out with your tongue. And then the third level, the one that each and every one of us must have at each and every situation in our lives, is performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar with our heart. What does this mean? That when we see goodness, we become happy. When we see evil and misdeeds and vice in our community, it hurts our heart and it pains us. Which is why we go ahead and we see that we need to train ourselves. We need to raise ourselves to such an extent that our hearts feel pain when we see injustice taking place in the world. We see that one day news came to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam when he was the Khalifat al-Muslimin. The news came to Amir al-Mu'mineen that one Christian lady in Kufa, she had her bracelet on her ankle stolen. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam, he states, he says that it wouldn't shock me if a Muslim, he died after hearing this news. That a Christian lady had her bracelet stolen. Why? Because a Muslim who is of the best community according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are of those people who have elevated their hearts, have elevated their souls and perfected it so much that whenever they see even the smallest injustice occur, it breaks their hearts. We go ahead and we see that if someone has this intense understanding and this ma'rifah of knowing the rules and have perfected their hearts and have perfected their souls, then no way they can ever allow anything else except for purity enter into this vessel. We see the example that one day Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan, he went and he sent a box of sweets to the house of Ammar ibn Yasir. Ammar ibn Yasir, this great companion of Ahlul Bayt, alayhi salatu wassalam, it is said that the 3 or 4-year-old daughter opened the door. The sweets were presented to this daughter and said, "This is from the leader of the Muslims." She went in and she opened the box and she put it in her mouth. Ammar ibn Yasir, I believe, some traditions say it was another companion. He comes forth to his daughter and says, "What is this you're eating, my daughter?" She says that a man, he came and he presented this gift. He said, "This is for you and your family and your father from the leader of the Muslims," as she was chewing this candy. It is said that at that moment, Ammar ibn Yasir said, "Oh my daughter, do you know who sent that? This was sent from Muawiyah." It is said that at that moment, this 3-year-old daughter, she runs out of her house. She spits out that candy and she says, "Oh messenger of Muawiyah, don't you know that the one who has the love of Ali ibn Abi Talib has nothing else in their heart? For the love of Ali ibn Abi Talib emphasizes and is penetrated through our heart and through our soul, and you cannot trade it with this candy or with the sweet or with any type of wealth." How many of us have elevated our status to that extent? When Aba Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu was-salam, he says before he leaves Medina that I only wish and I only aspire to do one thing. أُرِيدُ أَنْ أَأْمُرَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. He does not say this only for the purpose of his mission, of his revolution on the day of Ashura. Rather, what he's trying to do is he's trying to offer us and all of humanity a lesson. That at the very least, despise with your heart. If you can do more, then be of those who speak out with their tongue. And if you can do even greater than that, then allow your body, allow all of your efforts to be sacrificed in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, this is something that each and every one of us, we have it innately in our own hearts. That we go ahead and we take a look. That we see that from when we are young, we are those people who always perform Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. Let me give you an example. That today if I'm playing a video game with my friend, and the kid next to me, my friend, he sees me and I'm playing it wrong, what's he going to tell me? He says, "No, this is not the button you have to press. You have to press this button." From when we're very young, we know that we want to correct people when they're doing something wrong. When we get older, what happens? When we're in the workplace, when we're in a managerial position, when those under us are performing the tasks incorrectly, what do? We go toward them and say, "Hey, you're not supposed to be doing it this way. Do it this way. Get it right." No? But the problem is when it comes to the affairs of religion, when it comes to affairs of the heart, when it comes to the affairs of love, when it comes to the affairs of beauty, what do? We have trained our hearts, we have trained our souls to allow this disease to filter in. And we must be very wary, and we must be very careful. Because all it takes is one little blackness to enter, to stop us from performing this action. And we could fall into an abyss. Or we could be of those individuals who allow this light of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar to enter into our heart, and we can become a man like Hurr bin Yazid al-Riyahi, who in his last moment recognizes truth and justice. Why? Because he saw beauty and he saw perfection. And he allowed that to enter into his heart. Which is why when we talk about the Amr bil Ma'ruf and the Nahy anil Munkar of the heart, this helps us understand the concept briefly of what is known as at-tabarra and of al-la'na. When we perform the la'na of this group of enemies of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam, what we are doing on the most basic level is removing their qualities from our heart. When Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, he says, "I do not leave except that I perform Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar." He is saying that when I do these, that the opposite of me, they do not perform these. And when we are performing the la'na, we are doing it with our heart, perfecting ourselves, that we do not have these qualities who just accepted what happened to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. And O mu'mineen, what happened to the family of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wassalam? That those group of individuals across Damascus and across Medina and across Kufa and across humanity and across the world, they had not elevated their hearts to a situation where they would despise what happened to Abu Abdullah. That when that head was put on top of the spear, they were indifferent to it. Allahu Akbar. Which is why it is said that one day, many years later, Imam Zainul Abidin is walking in the streets of Medina, when all of a sudden he hears a man calling out, "Ana gharib, ana gharib, Ana gharib, I am a strange man, I have nothing, I am poor. It is said that at that moment, Imam Zainul Abidin, he goes toward that man and he says, oh man, why do you call yourself gharib? He says, do you have, a family? He says, yes, I have a family. He said, is that family going to bury you? He said, yes, that family is going to bury me. He said, do you have enough money for a kafan? He says, yes, I do. He says that before you die, do you have a son who is able to bring forth water so you can drink it before you die? He says, yes, I have all these things. Then he said, then, oh my brother, do not call yourself gharib, for the only gharib is the man whose body lays in Karbala. It is said that Imam Zainul Abidin, in these days, people would come forth and they would ask him, oh Imam Zainul Abidin, what was the most painful part of your journey? What was the most painful part of your trip? And he would begin to narrate to them what happened to his Aunt Zainab and begin to tell them about what happened to the women and to the children of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam. And I will just leave you with this one narration for tonight. It is said that in the last moments of the life of Imam Zainul Abidin, it is said that a group of companions, they came toward Imam Zainul Abidin. And the fourth Imam, he was crying and he was weeping. And they said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why do you weep like this? You're about to visit Rasulullah. You're about to visit Amir al-Mu'mineen. That when you attain martyrdom, this is your goal and this is what you strive for in your life. And then they say, oh Ya ibn Rasulullah, are you crying at what happened to Aba Abdullah? He says, no, I don't cry at what happened to Imam al-Hussein. They said, oh Imam Zainul Abidin, do you cry at the severed arms of Al-Abbas? He said, no, I don't cry what happened to Al-Abbas. They asked him, do you cry at the body of Qasim after it was trampled by horses? Imam Zainul Abidin says, no. Then do you cry at that strike that hit the head of Ali al-Akbar? Imam Zainul Abidin says, no. They said, oh, Ya ibn Rasulullah, then why do you cry? It is said that at this moment, Imam Zainul Abidin, he responds, he said, oh, my companions, by God, if you saw my Aunt Zainab on the 11th of Muharram, when she was running from tent to tent as the tents were burning, then you would also cry the same way. It is said that as the tents were burning, Imam Zainul Abidin was approached by Lady Zainab. It is said that Zainab said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, oh grandson of the Prophet, you are now the Imam. I have a question for you. Tell me, I hear glass breaking. What is that glass? It is said that at that moment, Imam Zainul Abidin said, oh Zainab, oh my aunt, that is not glass breaking, but that is the trampling of the horses on my father's body, my father Aba Abdullah. It is said that Umar ibn Sa'd, on the night of the 11th of Muharram, he gathered together all of his horsemen and he said, one by one, I need you to go and trample over each and every one of the companions of Aba Abdullah. He said, first go and trample over the body of Hur. It is said that the tribe of Hur, they were present, they were on the side of Umar ibn Sa'd. They said, oh Umar ibn Sa'd, you've already killed our man, you've already killed our loyal man. Do not be of those people who do not go ahead and trample over his body. He said, no problem. He said, then go ahead and trample over the body of Habib ibn Madahir. It is said that at that moment, Banu Asad, the tribe of Habib ibn Madahir, they said, oh Umar ibn Sa'd, you've already killed him. Leave his body. Do not trample over it. One by one, he said, go and trample over the body of Al-Abbas. It is said that the tribe of al-Banin, they came to Umar ibn Sa'd and they said, oh Umar ibn Sa'd, do not trample over the body of Abbas because he is from our tribe and leave him alone. One by one, they went until Umar ibn Sa'd, he says, then O horsemen and O Shimar, then which one of these people on the plains of Karbala, they come from the same tribe and none of them are represented? They said, only one man, he comes from the same tribe. His father is Ali and his mother is Fatima. It is said that at that moment they began to trample over the body of Aba Abdullah. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-zalimin. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Please raise your hands. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our grief and accept our sorrow for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of our master and our commander, Imam Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, fidahu arwah al-alamin. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are granted the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein in this life and his shafa'a in the next life. اللهم ارزقنا زيارة الحسين في الدنيا والشفاعة الحسين في الآخرة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطاهرين. ماتم حسن اللهم صل على محمد وآله.
وإلى حسين وإلى حسين وويلا